Hello and welcome. When you think of London Transport, you tend to think of AEC buses. And when you think of AEC buses, you tend to naturally think of London Transport. Now, that's not to say that London Transport exclusively only took AECs, because we know that's not true, don't we? But they were committed to buying at least 75% of its vehicle chassis from AEC. Now, that doesn't mean that other companies didn't get a look in with the vehicle manufacturing, because they did. There was vehicles like the GS, the Guy Special, and the unfortunately coded STDs. Shortly after the end of the Second World War, production of the AEC RT bus, which was to be London Transport's next standardised double-decker bus, resumed. Now, I have done a previous video on the RT, and I shall put a little link up in the top right hand corner for you to follow, and once you've watched this video, of course, you can go and watch that one. London Transport had ordered vast amounts of the RT chassis from AEC, as well as a similar amount of bodies from Park Royal and Weyman. But with London Transport desperate to replace its non-standard or life-expired bus fleet, it needed the new buses now rather than 18 months up the line. And AEC, Park Royal and Weyman could only build RTs so quickly. They couldn't just materialise 500 buses out of nowhere. It took time for the materials to be sourced and the vehicles to be built. With this in mind, London Transport decided to look for another manufacturer that could build an RT type vehicle and help relieve the waiting times for new buses. However, this would mean sacrificing a certain degree of the standardisation and interchangeability that London Transport craved with its whole fleet. London Transport approached Leyland to supply the chassis and running units of these extra RT class buses, and it was agreed that Leyland could supply 1,000 chassis of the 7-foot 6-inch width, which was the same width as the AEC built RTs. More importantly, potentially this would make them compatible with the Park Royal and the Weyman bodies, which were under construction at the time. Now, interestingly, this is probably one of the few times that the chassis was adapted to fit the bodywork of a vehicle. But in those days, London Transport had a lot of clout with its orders and could pretty much get anything built that it really wanted, in all fairness. Or so it seems in retrospect anyway. These buses would become the RTL class and were based on the standard Leyland Titan PD2/1 chassis. Although, as I said, these were adapted, and one of the modifications was that the bus chassis was fitted with a standard pre-selector gearbox, which was supplied ironically by AEC. Now, as I mentioned previously, there was a lot of pressure on Park Royal and Weyman, who were busy building bodywork for the standard AEC RTs. And here we come to the strange part of the story. Now, those of you who know London Transport's maintenance procedure will know that the bus went into the central works at Aldenham, and the bodywork and the chassis was separated. The bodywork was overhauled and the chassis was overhauled, and then they were remated at the other end of the factory. It was in effect a total rebuild rather than an overhaul. Now, the original bodies weren't always mated to the original chassis, so it became a bit of a hodgepodge which bus ended up with which bodywork on it. And the intention would be that they would build the identical RT3 type bodywork that was being built by both Weyman and Park Royal on the AEC RTs. So to build the 1,000 RTL bodies, London Transport contracted Metro Cammel of Birmingham. Now, this does get a little bit complicated, so just bear with me. However, to speed things up, London Transport agreed for Metro Cammel to produce its own design of body to match the others as closely as possible, and this would be designated RT7 type bodywork. So this is a bit like the Saunders and the Craven bodied RTs, that the specification was laid down, but it didn't have to be set in stone how the buses were built and what was under the skin. So Metro Cammel started buying in all the parts that it would need to build the bodies, and entering into agreements with subcontractors who would supply Metro Cammel with bits and pieces to build the bodies with. However, London Transport did a bit of a U-turn and asked Metro Cammel, instead of producing its own bodywork design, which would have been the RT7, to stick with the original design of the RT3 style bodies. This resulted in a bit of a dispute between Metro Cammel and London Transport, but they agreed to produce 450 bodies of its RT7 design, and by way of a peace offering, London Transport also asked them to build the bodywork on the entire fleet of 700 RF single-decker buses. Now again, the RF is a bus we've looked at in a previous video, and I'll try to remember to put a little link up in that top right hand corner for you. The reason for this change of mind was that Park Royal and Weyman's output of bodies had picked up dramatically, and there was a real risk of there being more bodies than there were chassis. In fact, the first RTL chassis that Leyland delivered, which was in February 1948, was dispatched to Park Royal, and it received an RT3 body, and this had been originally destined for RT657. Of the total RTLs built, this was the only one to receive a roof box body from new. Now here's another confusing thing that only really London Transport could have probably got away with and got involved in. The original intention was for the RTLs to be numbered after the RTW series. So the first bus, the first RTL, became RTL 501. However, subsequent buses started the sequence again at RTL 1. I did say this could be a little bit confusing and it could be a bit of a headache, and I do apologise if you're getting a migraine listening to this. RTL 501 entered service at Turnham Green on the 16th of June 1948. And later that year, RTL chassis started arriving at Park Royal, which was just as the RT chassis, the AEC RT chassis I should say, were beginning to run low. And these RTLs received Park Royal non-roof box bodywork. RTL 1, which of course was the second RTL, entered service on the 1st of December 1948 at Sidcup Garage, and it operated the route number 21. On the 24th of August 1949, RTL 551 entered service, which was the first bus to have the Metro Cammel bodywork on it. The last one, RTL 1000, was delivered on the 15th of March 1951. Initially, as I mentioned before, there was 450 RTLs bodied by Metro Cammel, and 550 were bodied by Park Royal. But these were topped up with further additional orders for RTLs to meet the need for new vehicles. This would result in a further 631 RTLs being built, and apart from the last 30, they were all bodied by Park Royal, the last 30 being bodied by Weyman, as was RTL 1307. This bus was specially prepared by Weyman for an exhibition in the North American tour of 1952. There were quite a few detailed differences between the Metro Cammel and the Park Royal and Weyman bodies, and this was enough to make sure that the Metro Cammel bodies weren't interchangeable with these other types. The Metro Cammel bodies were incredibly well built and were a lot stronger than the Park Royal bodies, and indeed were a quarter of a tonne heavier than the Park Royal bodies too. Now all London Transport RTLs and RTWs were delivered as red central buses. However, 18 RTLs were painted green during the autumn of 1959 to operate from Hatfield Garage between July 1960 and June 1961. Now, as I mentioned before, there was only one RTL built from new with a roof box body, but as the RTLs were being prepared for withdrawal, they were sometimes fitted with the older rooftop box body. The first RTLs being sold in 1958, with 50 of the lowest numbered RTLs being sold to Birds of Stratford-upon-Avon. Birds at the time were a very well-known dealer come breakers yard, and many a fine bus met its end here. Happily though, these RTLs were snapped up by independent operators all around the country. many of whom knew a good bus when they saw one and knew that anything that came out of London Transport with its overhauling system would be in fine fettle. In fact, the RTL you're looking at here was bought by Guernsey Bus in the 1990s and converted to a front entrance, mid-staircase, one-person operated bus. If I can find enough research material on this might be worthy of a video in its own accord. What do you think? I believe Guernsey Bus operated a couple of these. I don't know if they were both rebuilt like this. I know they had an open-top RT as well. They look very strange, don't they? What do you reckon? Worthy of a video in its own accord or not? Let me know in the comments down below. Now, when you think of the London Transport Trolleybus Replacement programme, you automatically think of Routemasters. And yes, that's initially what the Routemaster was designed for, to replace the trolleybuses from London Transport's trolleybus fleet. However, with large numbers of RTs and RTLs in store, the RTLs were used to implement some of these changes from trolleybuses to motorbuses. In April 1959, RTLs entered service at Clapton, Bow and Leighton in place of trolleybuses. The RTLs were always considered by the drivers to be heavier and noisier to drive. Indeed, some have suggested that RTL is an abbreviation of rattle, which is probably a little bit unfair, isn't it? As a result, the RTLs were less popular than the standard AEC RTs, and throughout the 60s, the withdrawals of the RTLs continued apace. Many of these buses found new owners, and many went abroad as well, with 728 heading off to Sri Lanka between 1958 and 1968. The last two RTLs in service was RTL 1512 and RTL 543, and these were withdrawn from service in November 1968. A few RTLs survived into the early 1970s as training buses and staff buses though. Leyland had also been under contract by London Transport to build 500 complete buses, that is, vehicles with not only the Leyland chassis, but also with Leyland bodywork too, and these were to be 4 inches wider than the standard RT at the time. These would become the RTWs and would be based on the Leyland Titan PD2/3 chassis. Again, these were modified in the same way that the RTLs were to London Transport specification. Now, London Transport had operated 8-foot wide vehicles before, but these were trolley buses, and the Metropolitan Police hadn't allowed them to operate in central London, and it was the same case with the RTWs. The extra 4 inches in the width was used to widen the gangway, which must have made them quite popular with the conductors at the time. However, the drivers still weren't overly impressed themselves, as the bus was again very heavy on the steering and tended to rattle and had a lot of engine noise. Being banned from central London meant they could only operate as red suburban buses. RTW1 was delivered on the 1st of March 1949 and entered service on the 11th of May at Tottenham on Route 41. The last of the 500 buses arrived in December 1950, and London Transport was desperate to get them operating in central London. So, as an experiment in May 1950, and of course with the Metropolitan Police's permission, 8 routes that operated through Notting Hill were swapped from RT allocation to RTW allocation, just for 1 week. This first trial involved swapping 306 RTWs over. This experiment for a week was considered a success, and this resulted in more experiments, the second one being in June-July 1950. This time the centre of the test were routes that operated through Shaftesbury Avenue in London's West End, and the trials would last for 2 weeks this time. Following on from these trials were the last ones, trials number 3, and this was centred on Threadneedle Street in central London. This time the trial only ran for a week. Once all these trials and tests had finished, there was a great reshuffle to get all the RTWs back to their original operating garages. But it had been worth it because RTWs were now going to be allowed to operate in central London. However, the Metropolitan Police still requested that they weren't used in areas where trams were running. Despite the RTWs not being as popular as the standard RTs, they still had an expected lifespan of 15 years in public service. The first RTWs were sold by London Transport in 1965, and although many were scrapped, some went on to second lives with independent operators and overseas operators as well. Now, being 8 foot, the RTWs matched the width of the newly introduced Routemaster. And as a result of this, the RTWs became invaluable as driver training buses. After all, there is no point on training somebody up to drive something that is slightly narrower than the bus they're going to be driving in service. That really is asking for trouble, isn't it? RTW 467 was the last bus to run in public service, and that last day was on the 14th of May 1966 at Brixton on the routes 95 and 109. The last RTW driver training bus, RTW 185, was sold in May 1971, and both this bus and RTW 467 are now happily preserved, as are indeed many other members of both classes. While not as popular as the main RT class, they do have a bit of a cult following amongst some enthusiasts. Well, we've nearly reached the end of this potted history of the RTL and the RTW class buses. And I do remember reading in some articles about all these buses as a child that they were looked upon as not really much of a success and a bit of a failure, to be honest. But as you can see, with a little bit of research and going into the history, you can see that they actually weren't that much of a failure at all. And the ones that were sold on fairly early went on to lead incredibly good lives with second-hand owners. I think it's fair to say that they were just singled out because they were non-standard. It's certainly nothing to do with their reliability, by the looks of it anyway. I'd love to know your thoughts and opinions on the RTLs and the RTWs as well. I've had various dealings with RTs over the years, but I've never met an RTL or an RTW. Tell me, are they better, do you think? Is it true they're noisier and more rattly? I love reading your comments down below, so please share with me your memories on these buses. I'd love to read them. Thank you so very much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, please like and share it. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss out on my future releases in this and my other series here on YouTube. Don't forget to explore my back catalogue of videos here as well, because there's going to be something for everybody who likes buses and coaches. And if not, let me know, and maybe I will do a video about it in a later date. Again, I love hearing your comments and suggestions for videos, and I do try and work my way through them eventually. It might take me a bit of time, but I do try. Again, thank you very much for watching. Bye for now.